After a flying visit to Tees Valley, where Ben Houchen had secured another term as Tory mayor, the Prime Minister went to bed on Friday evening dreaming of a similar success for Andy Street in the West Midlands, and there were even rumours that Conservatives could steal an unlikely victory in London. However, less than 24 hours later, Rishi Sunak's dreams had turned to dust. Sadiq Khan won a historic third term in the capital, and Labour's Richard Parker had narrowly defeated Street in Birmingham. Combined with the loss of almost 500 council seats and a huge reversal in the Blackpool South parliamentary by-election, by Sunday morning, the PM was waking up to a lecture from Suella Braverman. 2 sleeps is a long time in politics. Welcome back to the Downtown Den Politics Podcast.
Just a sort of bigoted woman.
Me and my friends sort of used to run through the fields of wheat.
You turn if you want to. The ladies not for turning.
It will cost.
I know words, I have the best words, but there's no better word than stupid.
Well, I'm delighted to be joined today by Jim Hancock, our Downtown in Business political commentator, and Kevin Johnson, who, of course, is our man in the West Midlands. I'm Frank McKenna, and we're talking today, of course, about those swathe of local and mayoral polls that took place on Thursday, and, of course, that parliamentary by-election in Blackpool. But we're going to start with what was probably the most dramatic and arguably most important result over the weekend, which was the West Midlands mayoralty. Kevin, Andy Street, the incumbent, has gone. A surprise to many, but you did say probably about a month ago that you were anticipating a narrow Labour victory. You couldn't have been more right, sir. So, Andy Street's gone, Richard Parker's in. What do you think delivered the seat for Labour?
Well, it might be the first time in my life I've been proved right with a semi-forecast, and so let's just leave that there. But what did, like all things in politics, many things did it. I don't think Andy did too much wrong, maybe apart from being a member of the Tory party. But, you know, he ran the campaign in his own way. He distanced himself from the Tories, as we've seen with both him and Houchen, but never quite enough. You know, obviously, people always knew he was Tory, and that's where his centre of gravity was, and that's absolutely fine. In a very different place in the Tory party to where a lot of people now seem to be in the modern-day Tory party. But couldn't shake that off. I think we forget, because Street has done 2 terms and established such a reputation, we forget that really the West Midlands, in normal, at least pre-Brexit, pre-Corbyn, pre-Boris terms, the West Midlands is a majority Labour area, whatever that means in today's world. So Labour should have always won it. They should have won the first time round, but for Street's excellent campaign and for the fact that Sean Simon was frankly too lazy to do it. And then, this is a phrase you don't hear too often, Theresa May was riding high. So all of those things, you know, worked in Street's favour. He then, you know, has run it well, certainly as a champion of the region the last 2 times. But it should really always been Labour. Parker has come in, not a man that many people know, obviously, but he's on the back of a Labour wave, isn't he? We may talk about whether Keir has sealed the deal with the electorate yet, but he's on the back of a Labour wave, isn't he? And they ran a reasonable campaign, not an exciting campaign, but they ran a reasonable campaign. They worked very hard on getting the vote out, which is crucial, you know, for all the sort of broadcast headlines. Actually, the real work is done on the ground, isn't it? Getting people out, convincing people on doorsteps, getting people down to the polling booth. So all of those factors, I think, came into it, and he got there by 1,500 votes.
And you mentioned there, Kevin, that Andy Street had distanced himself as much as he possibly could from the Conservative Party, certainly the Conservative government. Do you think the result may have been different had he gone full independent? Or would that simply have robbed him of that machine that you do need on the ground to deliver your get out the vote strategy?
Yeah, I think it's tricky, isn't it? And this debate has gone on for a while. I think he's gone through this debate himself at various points. I think your point is right, though. In the end, you need a machine, don't you? And of course, there are exceptions. We know that. not necessarily with Ken Livingstone, etc. There are exceptions to this. You can become an elected politician, you become an elected mayor without a traditional party machine. But it'll have been hellishly difficult. And I do think, I did say this on one of my posts the other day, that it's a bit disingenuous for Andy to have said, I don't take the whip. I'm not a Tory taking the whip. You can trust me. You've had millions of pounds. You've had lots of people. You've had organisation from Tory High Command, from CCHQ, poured into your campaign, and they're sitting supporting you throughout your mayoralty. So he's benefited from the party systems and structures. He'd have struggled without that. That being said, I think the real question is, if he had, after he walked up the hill at the last Tory party conference of the HS2 hill and said, of this I cannot stand no more, I'm off, and flounced off, would it have been different then? Could he have then run for whatever that is, 6-7 months on from there? Could he have then run an independent campaign? Possibly. But it had been very, very difficult, and presumably the Tories would have put in somebody else as the official candidate. That would have split the vote more, etc., etc. So, by that is by no means certain. But I think that was probably one of his chances to do that. But as he told you in conversation, Frank, he was never going to do that. Although there was a lot of spinning going on, and he employed top spinners in the lead up to that conference. He was never going to walk out of conference, B, he was never going to walk out of the party.
Lots of ifs, buts and maybes. The one thing we do know is he secured the support very publicly of Boris Johnson, sort of either poll commentary on why Andy Street was different to what was going on in 10 Downing Street. I thought that was a rather strange move, Kevin, because there's nobody surely more associated with the Conservative government's failure than Boris Johnson. Yet there he was, front and centre of Andy Street's sort of pre-poll leaflet. So as I say, I thought that was a strange tactic. What did you make of that?
Well, I thought there was a number of strange tactics in there, because you had a number of celebrity endorsements and what I would call manufactured interview pieces. He had a little tribute from Ozzy Osbourne. He had little sit-downs with Jasper Garrett, Bob Warman. He had a tribute from Gary Newbon. Some of these people are old friends and old colleagues of mine. I love them all. But I think actually the top of that chart, when I saw it, was when he had a conversation in some kind of kitchen, I think, with Karen Brady.
Yes. Yeah, that was another strange one, wasn't it?
I thought, now, when, Andy, you're being criticised for being, too much of this sort of social media fluff and nonsense, too much sort of celebrity mayoralty, which Richard Parker is not going to be, by the way. When you're doing, it's all about me, it's all about hard hats and fluorescent jackets, which I think he did too much of. And then you're with the ultra publicity seeking Karen Brady. I think that was maybe a step too far. And then, as you say, then the kind of call with both he and Houchen had a letter, wasn't it? I think went to activists from Boris Johnson saying, basically, I might have been rubbish, but these two guys are great. I can understand, because Boris still touches, bits of the Tory party and probably beyond. He's still got some kind of pull over a certain constituency. So I suppose when you're desperate and there's only going to be a few hundred votes in it, you do what you can. But do you really want to be seen next to Boris Johnson? I think I'd be not giving the electorate a reminder that he was quite a big Boris supporter publicly. And of course, he chose Liz Truss to be his choice as Prime Minister. So I think I'd have probably been walking away from those memories rather than reminding the electorate of them myself.
Yeah, and Karen Brady, not the most popular personality in Birmingham, I wouldn't have thought, after a sort of ownership of the football club at one point. And Birmingham City fans wouldn't necessarily see her as a great figure of influence, would they, in a positive way?
Well, I think, tempted as I am to reveal stories, I've not had a drink yet this early in the morning, Frank. So, but all I will say is she has done very, very well. And created quite a sort of media personality with a certain level of talent.
Right. Well, we'll move on from there then, Evan. And we're not here to talk about Karen Brady or The Apprentice or any of that sort of stuff. Let me ask you a couple of other things before we move on to the other mayoral contests over the weekend, and that is the situation in terms of that majority of just over 1,500 and what may have impacted on the Labour vote, which was the independent candidate who secured around 30,000 votes. So although this was seen as a tight contest and Andy Street has come within a whisker of retaining the mayoralty, the fact is that had those 30,000 votes gone the way you would anticipate most of them would have gone, which is to Richard Parker and the Labour Party, because this guy stood with the endorsement of George Galloway very much on the Gaza ticket. Does that sort of lend itself to your initial view? West Midlands actually is a Labour stronghold in normal times, and we're coming back to normal times.
To some degree, yeah. I mean, the guy got, Yaqub, he got just under 70,000 of the region entirely, 11%. I think I'm doing
Was it 70,000?
70,000
Wow,
in the
I didn't
region.
realise it was that high. Okay.
I think he got, and I'm doing this from memory now, he got something like 20% of the electorate of the votes in the Birmingham, one of the 7 wards, as it were, districts, voting in the combined authority. I mean, so that's our big old chunk. And this guy didn't take part in hustings and the sort of usual campaigning. He's known as the TikTok lawyer, so a lot of use of social media. So that brings to question, kind of single issue politicians. Brings into question about sort of participating in the usual form of electoral activity, and whether people will just get away with social media and other sort of newer activities. Brings all that into question. I noticed, you all know this better than I, Frank, I noticed in some of the other combined authorities there weren't that many candidates. Do I remember there was, a smaller number than we had in the West Midlands. Yeah. You didn't have those kind of, and everybody's entitled to stand in an election. There are rules, and if people, follow the rules, and then they can stand. That's a democracy. But it can take away these, 30-odd thousand that the Greens and Reform had. Lib Dems are last, by the way, in the West Midlands, which is going to hurt them. So that's going to take votes away, as it were, from the principal candidates. But that's elections. I think the issue really is there's an issue about Labour and Gaza, and I come back to. But on Friday, Labour thought it was gone. They did not think they had this election. But I think the real issue for me is adopting first past the post. We've gone in all combined authority elections, including London. We've gone from that supplementary vote system that came in with them at the beginning to now going first past the post. If you remember, Street only won by about 4,000 votes in the first election after the recounts of the second and third votes were reallocated. So I thought at the time that was a bad move. I don't remember that much of a campaign against it, including from Labour, which I thought was a mistake at the time. So one of the things I'd be doing in the big sort of constitutional reforms that Starmer wants to do on the back of Brand's report, one of the things I would be doing is to bring back some form of AV, supplementary voting, whatever, back into at least combined authority and PCC elections.
Mm. And the final thing I'll ask you, Kevin, is Richard Parker. Obviously, as you say, much lower profile candidate than Andy Street, likely to be a lower profile mayor, I would have thought. But I know that you were impressed with his policy, his manifesto that he put forward to the people of West Midlands.
Yeah, I mean, he had a manifesto. I'm not saying everybody engaged with it or read the manifesto, but I think he had a policy platform that people could understand and get their heads around. And maybe they might disagree with it, but he had things which really in the last 2 elections, Labour did not have. Sean Simon in the first election, his major policy was nationalising the M6 toll. I mean, it was ridiculous then as it is now. But yes, Richard wants to take control of public buses under public control, as similar to what Andy Burnham has done just done in Greater Manchester. Big push on jobs and training places, big push on social housing, and other things. So I think there are things that you get your head around. The other thing I would say is that it's not front and centre there, is it? Of the sort of policy platform that's going to get Joe in the street excited about. I think he's going to run the authority in a different way. This idea that we have in the West Midlands, that the different council leaders, the 7 council leaders, all have a sort of portfolio, in a cabinet style way, and they run a portfolio of whether it might be, economic development or jobs or transport, etc. This idea they can do that as well as running their own cash-strapped councils, I think, has always been for the birds. There's an awful lot of process, awful lot of board papers and process that goes on, a load of meetings that go on all the way through up until the actual board meeting. It's never really worked, and I think it has been a problem that Street has been the man front and centre, which is fine to the degree that he's the mayor, he's the directly elected mayor. But we know combined authorities work in slightly different ways, and particularly combined authority, which has different political colours, unlike the authorities that even better in the northwest. So I think one of the most important things is going to be changing the way that the authority works and changing the way that Parker will work as, if you like, a kind of first among equals, rather than being some great superstar.
It is going to be interesting to see how things develop in the West Midlands.
Can I just make one observation? I'm absolutely fascinated by what Kevin's saying, just as a sort of an outsider to the West Midlands. I'll be very interested in what the relationship is between Rachel Reeves, in particular, and Keir Starmer and Richard Parker. I mean, there was all that tittle tattle about that Parker had given Reeves money and all this sort of stuff. But looking at the broader picture, and it applies to our more general discussion about mayors, if we presume that there'll be a Labour government, although we need to think about that as well. But these people, and Andy Burnham's been flagging it up this weekend.
James, you're taking us into a discussion what we're going to do in the second part of the program. I don't know how producers managed him at the BBC.
I wasn't mad. Anyway, well, just to confine myself on I'm really sorry that Andy Street's lost. And one of the reasons is that people say, oh, why can't we have more independent spirits in politics? Now, I know he was technically a Conservative, but he did try and be the man for the West Midlands and look objectively at things and support HS2 and things like that. And he's paid a price. I think it's quite sad, actually.
No, I was surprised, actually, because, again, when you're not in and around the West Midlands, obviously, I visit Birmingham and I go to Wolverhampton occasionally. And in both of those areas, obviously, Andy Street's recognition is really high. But as Kevin said, the West Midlands is a big old conurbation, isn't it? And people do, as elsewhere in the country, often go out and put their tick in the box of the political party. Andy Street decided that was going to be the Conservatives continually, 3 terms, worked for him the first 2 times, not this time. I'm, on a personal level, sorry to see him go. We had a great relationship with him at Downtown in Business, but no doubt we'll forge a similar relationship with Richard as well. And just in terms of the Rachel Reeves association, I don't think that's going to do him any harm, is it? He's big mates with Rachel. She did a couple of hustings with him. I know they are colleagues and friends in the genuine sense of those words. So being mates with the Chancellor of the Exchequer, as I say, I don't think that's going to be a bad thing for Birmingham, the West Midlands, or Richard Parker. But Jim, I mentioned in the introduction that it being a really bad set of results for the Conservatives. On Thursday evening, though, the narrative that was being written was Tees Valley held, a 16% swing to Labour, which appeared to be ignored by a lot of commentators and certainly by the Prime Minister, because that would be, on a swing of that size across the country, more than enough for Keir Starmer to secure a majority in the House of Commons. But nevertheless, Sunak had, as I say, been able to create this narrative of we've maintained our position in Tees Valley, we're going to win in the West Midlands. It looked as though Andy Street was going to hang on there. And then there was these bizarre rumours came out of the capital that Sadiq Khan was under pressure from this lunatic candidate, Susan Evans. And so the Tories sort of went to bed, as I say, on Thursday evening, quite buoyant. What did you make of all that sort of narrative rumour mongering and the commentary on Thursday evening? And I have to ask you, as a former BBC correspondent, was Laura Koonsberg right to embroil herself right in the middle of it, because she was the one who was Sadiq Khan is in trouble?
Yes, I have to acknowledge that Laura Kunsberg, for whom I have a very, very wide appreciation, has made two mistakes in her commentary in the last few weeks. She fell for that line that Rishi Sunak was going to call the general election a week before polling the local elections to head off a coup today, presumably, immediately after the elections, which I never thought was going to happen. And also that the government were in deep trouble and all that sort of thing. So she's made two bad calls. I think the situation was that, I think we talked about it last week, there was an occasion in the 1990s where the Conservatives only won Wandsworth and made that a huge issue nationally and said, look, we've held on to Wandsworth. And it looked as if they were going down that route with Tees Valley, and we're hoping for Andy Street as well. But that clearly didn't come off. There is a wider issue about the reason I think that the Prime Minister hasn't come under further attack, apart from anything else. Even the hardliners, even Braverman and people saw the absurdity of it. But also, I don't know whether this is the appropriate moment to discuss it, because as you've already demonstrated, you're a tough chairman. Right? That Rawlings and Thrasher have pointed us to the national share that Labour got, 34%.
Yeah, and as I say, we'll come on to that in the second part of the programme, Jim. But I want to stick with what this means for the Conservative government and for Rishi Sunak, because you've indicated, Tees Valley, that they were hanging on to that, and they thought the West Midlands. How serious even the Conservatives thought Sadiq Khan was in trouble, I don't know. We'll never know. But there was certainly strong rumours that London was looking as though it could go Tory, and that would have been a huge surprise. And that would have actually changed the whole conversation that we're having today. The other thing that doesn't help the government is that these results spread over the 3 days as they were. That doesn't help, does it? Because if you'd have got all these results at the same time, then as Cecil Parkinson did back in the 80s, the Tories would have just focused and honed in on Tees Valley. And that would have been it. That would have been their whole narrative. But of course, that had gone by Thursday. The story had moved on very quickly. And it moved on to, ultimately, the West Midlands. That was a real nail-biter. And you could sense, the Conservatives that were in television studios doing the rounds, the Labour representatives as well, they were all waiting for this result. And had it gone the other way, and 1,500 votes could have changed the whole dynamic of the way that this election is being viewed. But where does it now leave Rishi Sunak in the government, Jim? As you say, doesn't appear that there is any appetite now amongst the rebels to change leadership. So Sunak is there until the next general election. But that doesn't stop Suella Braverman going on the television on Sunday and absolutely roasting him. Roasted Sunak, roasted his policies, asking him to change direction. I'm not sure how further to the right you want him to go, really. But how's he going to be able to maintain this, the five families? How's he going to be able to manage his party between now and November, presuming it's going to be a November election? Never mind turn round the fortunes of his government.
Well, there won't be now, unless unforeseen events take place, any more by-elections or real elections, because that's been one of the debilitating drumbeats for the Prime Minister, is this constant parade of by-elections, which he's lost with spectacular swings. So during the summer, that'll go quiet. And as I've said many times before on this podcast, he is hoping that the economy improves, and that the tax cuts do filter through to people. Now, we can have an argument about whether people's minds are completely made up and nothing's going to make a difference, but that is the only strategy left to him. And it was quite interesting in the TV studios when they were urged by interviewers to get off this mantra about we're sticking to the plan. They clearly have decided to stick to the plan about Rwanda and the economy improving and the tax cuts that they've made. And that seems to me to be the only strategy. And frankly, the Braverman recipe yesterday, where I think she also torched her own leadership chances. I mean, anyone who would elect a woman who is so divisive and traitorous as that to lead the party. It's the old thing about he who wields the dagger never inherits the crown. That seems to be what I think will happen, is that the Sunak will bed down, try and hope the economy improves, and then go to the country in the autumn.
Our old friend Jo Phillips, who would have joined us today, but she's gone sailing. How dare she? She's still convinced that Suella Braverman is going to jump ship to reform before the election.
Possibly. I mean, that's we can have that discussion. In the light of the Reform's performance, I don't know how they did in the West Midlands, Kevin, but they got only about 4 councillors elected, but they were present in some places like Sunderland and things like that, and nearly beat the Tories into second place in Blackpool South.
Tories, again, we talk about small margins. Had the Reform candidate finished second in Blackpool South, and he came within 100 votes of doing so, that would have been surely Rishi Sunak, your time is up, wouldn't it, Jim?
Well, and Frank, just go back to your earlier point. If all the elections had been counted overnight, which I think it should be the law that they are, by the way, not least because it makes far better telly and it'll give me a good reason to stay up all night to watch them all come through. But if that had been the case, if Richard Parker had won in the early hours of Friday morning, if, as you say, Reform had come second in Blackpool, the narrative would be different. I'm not saying there would today be a rebellion on and a candidate standing and all the rest of it, for the reasons that Jim touches on. But the narrative would be even more different, wouldn't it, than this spread out sort of 3 days of elections. I don't think Richard Parker ever thought he was going to be the prime time entertainment Saturday night, 9 o'clock, and there's his vote coming in. I don't think that was in his plan at all. But I think it would be different. Can I just pick up, Frank, if I may, without ruining your running order, and answer the question that you put to Jim, but he didn't really answer. Maybe as a good old BBC man shouldn't, but I think you're right about Laura Kingsburg. I like him. I think he's very, very good. But it happened before when she was political editor. I think you've got to exercise a judgment when you're given gossip and you're given spin by the special advisors and all the rest of it. You've got to exercise judgment about what you do with that, and just kind of, as we all might do, and say, "Oh, we've got to pass on some information because aren't we clever and don't we know everybody and we've got little tidbits." You can't do that in her status and share it sort of with the nation as sort of, even if you couch it, which I'm pretty sure she would have done, even if you couch it, it gives rise, doesn't it? Because you've got a status, okay, no longer political editor, but still a major political journalist with a Sunday morning programme. It gives a status to kind of rumours and spin and tittle-tattle. And I do think political journalists, as opposed to the likes of us babbling on a podcast, I think proper, full-blown, active political journalists do have to be careful about recycling the kind of spin and nonsense that are given to them by handlers and spinners. I understand. I think you can make a point that Labour would have been worried with all the kind of anti-stuff that Khan has, and they would have been worried with ULEZ and the outer London boroughs, and worried because of what happened in Uxbridge. So I think there's some credibility there, but really it's not really going to happen. And we had this in other places, didn't we, where people were saying things, journos and others, Kate Ferguson and the Sun and others, who were saying things which were demonstrably untrue, or they could not know because the ballot papers were locked away between them going in the ballot box and going to count 24 hours, 36 hours later. I think we do sometimes need to expect more from proper journalists as opposed to us old codgers babbling on here.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I thought Kingsburg let herself down, but mostly the BBC. I'm a big supporter of the BBC, but the more that sort of thing happens, the less credibility the organisation has. It just becomes part of the overall noise that people make. And yeah, I was disappointed in that particular post that she put out. And it did lend credibility to the rumour, because actually up until that point, I thought, oh, this is stuff and nonsense. But as soon as a major figure from the BBC says it, you think, oh, actually, there might be something in that. In fact, Sadiq Khan's majority increased. So there was absolutely no way in which that rumour was anywhere near true. It was a very strange thing for her to say. Let me just go back to that point you made, though, Kevin. It'd be interesting to get Jim's take on this. I was a bit disappointed Thursday night going to bed at 2 o'clock, knowing not much more than I did at sort of 11 o'clock. It does take away the razzmatazz of the poll and the election time, or is that just people like us, Jim, us politicos?
What takes away? You hadn't got
The
many
fact that you have
results.
these counts over 3 days rather than actually getting them all done overnight.
Right. Well, okay. Let me slightly different from you. I actually let's just have a bit of a row here. I would actually abolish overnight counting. You know, I mean, if you want attention on politics, then why do you do the counting with the results coming in at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning? Apart from the expense of it and everything else, I would actually do it on the Friday. The second thing is that you've got a problem where you've got police and crime commissioners and local council elections. The counting staff you need to be doing simultaneous counts would be absolutely huge. So you're bound to, if you have elections for different posts, do it over at least 2 days. So I would just say that, and that was slightly the point of the Thursday night Friday program. There wasn't a lot to say. I mean, the emphasis on Sunderland in the first hour and a half was unbelievable, because good old Sunderland have athletes, trained athletes carrying the ballot boxes so that they get the, so that I know what Kevin's saying, but I'm just in a different camp from that point of view.
Well, Jim, I think it's very disappointing that you brought logic and practicality to this discussion.
Yeah, I'd agree with you, Kevin. I quite like the all-nighter, sat there waiting for all the results to come in. I wonder whether the alternative then is to actually just say, okay, we're not counting any votes overnight and it's all going to be done on the Friday. That might make more sense. But I just thought it was strange having results on the Thursday, then on the Friday, and then on the Saturday. Now, before we close and go into the subject that Jim is obviously desperate to get to, which is Labour's performance in those elections, the final thing I want to say, and this I think was a credit to politics, were the speeches that were made by Richard Parker and Andy Street following the result in the West Midlands on Saturday, because both guys would have been going through all sorts of emotions over that 24-hour period in the lead up to the announcement being made. Richard Parker, very generous in terms of saying Andy Street's done a good job. We're inheriting a very high-profile position, and sort of gave him a round of applause actually from the stage. And then Andy likewise saying, he wished Richard all the best, and I think that was genuine. We need a bit more of that in our politics, Kevin, don't we?
Well, we do need more of that, and they, because they are, I said this all along, they are both genuine guys. They are people who stood for election because they believe in something, they believe in the region, they want to improve the region, they want to champion the region better. We've seen Andy Street do that, and I think you could see both in that speech, but also in the post interviews. I mean, the man was devastated. Whatever you think of the man, whatever you think of politics, whatever you think of mayors, this was a man who was, absolutely shot to pieces. I'm sure, even with his energy, he was absolutely knackered as well. But what
do you think he'll do now, Kevin?
Well, here you go. I will come back to your question, Frank. But no, Jim, I'll tell you what I would do. If I were Richard Parker, I would do something which Andy did not do, and I was disappointed he did not do when he won in 2017. He was up against two very good candidates in the Greens and the Lib Dems, both very decent people, as well as Sean Simon from Labour, who is a very clever man. Not so much for Sean for all kinds of other reasons, but with the Lib Dem and the Green candidates, I'd have had them in and I would have given them jobs.
Yeah.
So if I was, because they both had things to offer. If I were Richard Parker, I would be ringing up Andy and saying, commiserations and all of that. Go and enjoy your walking in Wales and take some time away. But when you're back, let's sit down. Let's see what we can do together. What I might say to him is, why don't you come in, with no disrespect to the current person, why don't you come in and be the chair of the West Midlands Growth Company? Why don't you build that organisation up? Because I know Richard has some plans for it. Why don't you become, a more active chair of that? And work with Neil Rami, who obviously they both know very well. Work with Neil Rami, and let's take your ambassadorial skills and talents to the next level. You won't have to worry about the politics. My guess is he probably doesn't care too much to be too involved in Tory politics now. I may be wrong about that. But he can do something and really get in working close by Neil Rami. He could do something, I think, to take the growth company to the next level. But of course, just go back to your question, Frank. So they're both very decent chaps and genuine, and have gone through the ringer in that election. Compare and contrast that to the equivalent speeches in London.
Yeah.
Sadiq Khan and Susan Hall, who might be one of the maddest people ever to run for a major political office in this country. I mean, Susan Hall was, disgraceful and disgusting are the only words I can find for it. The way she conducted herself with no humility and no generosity. We do not need people like that in our politics. We need more Richard Parkers, more Andy Streets. I realise they're both very white middle-aged men, so we need greater diversity. But in terms of personal qualities and the kind of reasons, the objectives they go into an election, we need more people like that and less people like Susan Hall, who have no humility and no generosity of spirit. Commiseration.
Couldn't agree more, Kevin. And on that note, we will take a short break. When we come back, we'll be talking about the thing that Jim Hancock's been trying to talk about throughout the whole podcast, Labour's performance in those polls on Thursday evening. Stay with us. We'll be back in a minute.
Hi, I'm Frank McKenna, the Chief Executive and Group Chairman of Downtown in Business, and we are currently taking votes for the City of Liverpool Business Awards, the City of Manchester Business Awards, and the City of Birmingham Business Awards. So if you want to vote for your favourites, please go to our website, all the W's, downtowninbusiness.com, vote for the company or the individual who you think is deserving of a business award in 2024, and find out all the details of how you can get a seat at those three great events. So that's the City of Liverpool Business Award on the 4th of July at Sefton Park Palmhouse, and then in the autumn we're at the Lowry for the Manchester event, and we're at Bank, the fantastic restaurant in Birmingham, for the City of Birmingham Business Award. So get voting, get booking your tickets, and we look forward to celebrating with all those fantastic winners when those awards events come around.
Okay, welcome back to the latest edition of the Downtown Den Politics podcast. Delighted to be joined today by Kevin Johnson, down in the West Midlands there, and Jim Hancock, who is down in Plymouth, that neck of the woods anyway. And we will talk about his football team at the end of the podcast. He says for us to do that as well. But throughout this morning, he's been desperate to get into this result for what it means for Labour in terms of those polls on Thursday evening. And James, you did reference the Michael Thrasher sort of poll, and he was saying that if these results were translated in the same way for a general election, then Labour will fall short by about 30 seats, if memory serves me correctly, of an overall majority. Before I ask you to comment on that particular analysis from Mr. Thrasher, may I interject the fact that he did not seem to take account of the fact that Labour will do much better in Scotland than they have previously, that Reform did not stand in many of the seats that were fought on Thursday evening, and they will clearly eat more into the Conservative vote than was the case on Thursday night. And he also seemed to ignore the fact that people like Andy Street and Ben Houchen do have this huge personal following, which will have boosted the Conservative performance on Thursday. So, against that backdrop, James, I would say to you, Keir Starmer and the Labour Party are on course for a majority, parliamentary majority, though not the landslide that Tony Blair enjoyed in 1997. The final thing I'll say before you get stuck into Keir being too cautious is this. In 1997, Tony Blair went to the polls having inherited a Labour Party that had been totally transformed by Neil Kinnock and partially by John Smith, had no internal difficulties to worry about whatsoever. Party had been in opposition for 18 years, desperate for power. Tony Blair could have said he was going to privatise Buckingham Palace and, nationalise, but not nationalise Buckingham Palace. What could Tony Blair have said? So there was nothing that Tony Blair could say in 1997 that was going to cause any problems for him internally in the Labour Party. Keir Starmer inherited a party that had suffered its greatest general election defeat in a generation, had a Corbynista wing that was still having some influence on constituency parties and local politics, certainly, and he's had to manage all of that. And here we are, less than 5 years later, and he's on the cusp of 10 Downing Street. Keir Starmer has been a hugely impressive Labour leader, and I think it is difficult to level any criticism against him, Thrasher's predictions or not. Jim, over to you.
Well, I'm sure Kevin will agree with me. The normal procedure in democratic discussion is to allow your invited guests to present their case, and then perhaps
You're not an invited guest.
modestly
co-presentator. Come on.
modestly rebut what they're going to say, rather than them flattening every point they were going to make in about. No, you slightly misinterpret my intentions this morning. I think probably Starmer is still on course to get a slim overall majority, but I just wanted to inject into the conversation and hear what you and Kevin had to say about just the word of caution that that national share of the vote. Now, imagine that Rawlings and Thatcher have actually done some presumptions about how Scotland would have voted in these circumstances, and it's obviously a tentative thing because it's making these presumptions, but just to draw people's attention to the fact that this is a national projection which says if the whole of the United Kingdom, or Great Britain anyway, I don't think Northern Ireland, Great Britain had voted in a similar pattern, the Labour Party would have got about a 34% share, and comparing that with the 10 points extra that Tony Blair had in 1997. The point they were trying to make was that it's not as overwhelming as it was for Blair. And the point of that is that Keir Starmer, as we've often said before, needs to do better than Tony Blair in order to get a one-seat majority. So I just think that we should be cautious about that, be cautious about one or two other things, which is that the Gaza issue will play in a certain number of constituencies. And if it's pretty tight in one or two constituencies, I don't want to overemphasize this, in one or two constituencies, it could make the difference. I mean, you talk to Wes Streeting, he's paying very much attention to this well-funded Gaza candidate that's standing against him in Ilford North. So I just think, and then going back to my old mantra about the improving economy and all that sort of thing, and in a few months' time, I just think we just need to be a tiny bit cautious. That's all I wish to say. And apart from that, your comments are so valid, Frank, that I was just worship.
Can I just say to Jim,
I actually think that there would have been some, on a serious note, concern within Labour ranks, because they would have been hoping for some perhaps more spectacular gains than they managed to secure on Thursday. Kevin, what are your thoughts? Do you think Labour's performance was as good as it could have got, or were you expecting them to do a bit better?
Well, I think, actually, I'm going to disagree with your last point slightly, Frank, and say it couldn't be better for Keir. If you'd have come out of these elections, Houchen Street had gone, Reform second in Blackpool, maybe the Tories started to, they had a kind of vote of confidence in Sunak, but he got through, or something. I mean, in a way, that would have been worse, because you've now got a sitting duck, really in number 10, haven't you, who is now deemed to be a loser. I know we had that comment from Angela Rainey the other day, which I think was slightly misguided, but he looks like an election loser, even though he's never competed in an election either for himself or as a leader of the party. So I think that's better in a way that it's ended up in that position. I think it's better that the Rawlings and Thrasher model says that he's going to be, the largest party in a hung parliament. If it looked like he was running away with it now, I think that may work against him. I think it helps for Keir to be able to keep saying, there's more work to be done. There's more people, whether that's to do with Gaza and Palestine and so on, or beyond that. there's more work to do. I think that helps, particularly probably internally with party discipline and keeping his cabinet, together and focused. I think it helps to be in this position rather than looking like you're about to sweep in with 20, 40, 60, 167, whatever. So I think that helps. I will just slightly counter Jim. I think I'm right in saying, Jim, that the Rawlins Thrasher model explicitly says it doesn't take into account the Scottish factor. I think they are allowing for one seat, or anyway, certainly a small number of seats for Labour, rather than what it looks like, given what the SNP are going through. Well, it looks like that Labour will pick up 20 odd or something like that seats up in Scotland. And it obviously, computing from local elections into a general election, given, turnout, given not everywhere was voting, albeit with PCC elections. All of that, I think, taken means that probably the Labour lead is greater than that forecast gives you. But even so, I think it's probably better for Keir not to look like he's running away with it. Not least because you've got to, as we touched on in the first half of the podcast, you need to get your electorate out. And if a Labour electorate on a cold, wet night in November thinks it's a done deal and Keir's walking into number 10, that's not going to help to get the vote out of it if that looks too obvious. So, in a way, these results couldn't be more perfect for Starmer.
That's a great point, Kevin. Although I would say that if you look at the headlines yesterday and this morning in particular, this old phrase, a coalition of chaos, has come back into the political narrative, with Rishi Sunak saying, look, it's going to be a coalition. Can you imagine what it's going to be like if you've got Labour having to negotiate with the Liberal Democrats and the Greens and the Scottish National Party and whoever else he has to do a deal with to get his hands on the keys to number 10? Will that really play again as it did in 2015? The coalition of chaos seems to me that's what we've got now, isn't it?
Well, exactly. That's the answer, isn't it? You just got to say, hold on, you've got a party that has to negotiate with itself to get anything done. You've got a party that delivered you, whatever you think about Brexit, it has delivered you a very poor Brexit outcome. It's got a party that has delivered you the Liz Truss quasi-Kwarteng budget, delivered you all manner of other nonsense. Not that they will make this case, of course, but if you've got to negotiate with a couple of Greens and occasionally with the SNP, other things you agree on, that's much better than a Tory party, which is, 5 families or however many other individual parties it is. So I think that whole, Alex Salmond, Edmund Miliband in the pocket of Alex Salmond, coalition chaos, given the events, given what the Tories have gone through for the last few years, I'm not sure that narrative will do the Tories much good.
Jim, we have campaigned long and hard at downtown for devolution. For regional mayors, we think that more devolution the better. And obviously, Andy Street, Andy Burnham, Sadiq Khan in London, as London mayors always do, they've all got big sort of personalities and have become household names as far as people who follow politics are concerned, at least. And I think Ben Houchen would say as well, wouldn't you, in Tees Valley, people obviously have voted for their personal brand on Thursday. Andy Burnham, sort of weighed his vote in Greater Manchester. Sadiq Khan, as I mentioned, increased his majority. Andy Street came within a smidgen of holding on to the West Midlands in normal circumstances. If that would have been a straight Labour-Tory fight, as Kevin has evidenced in his earlier comments, that would have just gone straight to Labour with a big swing towards the opposition party as far as government and the mayoralty were concerned. However, the one thing that I was really disappointed in as far as all those elections were concerned was turnout. So these personalities, these mayors, are still not being able to engender that local enthusiasm to get people out to vote. Did you share my disappointment in that regard, Jim?
Yeah, yes, I did, and particularly Kevin's evidence that even in the West Midlands, where it was demonstrably a very tight contest, and was even flammed up in the Tees Valley as a very tight contest, that the turnouts were disappointing, because normally when people think there's something up for grabs, they vote, whereas it's a bit more difficult, perhaps, to get people in the Liverpool City region and Greater Manchester, etc., to turn out. And of course, we, as you said before, in North Yorkshire, there was a new East Midlands, new these elected positions. And I mean, and it becomes with the police and crime commissioners as well. You know, sometimes people say, well, these are new posts and people have to get used to them. But the police and crime commissioner has been around for quite a long time, and we don't see very high turnouts in these elections. But it is, you know, considering that these people, I think Andy Street and Andy Burnham have actually grabbed this opportunity to be the champions for their regions, and they have attracted considerable media publicity, far more than the old group leaders system that we used to have, and has been reverted to in the case of Bristol, by the way. It is pretty disappointing. I mean, a tiny contribution to that might be, I don't want to overemphasize this, what Kevin was saying about this changing of the voting system, so that, you know, if you are a true Green or a Liberal Democrat who can at least in their first vote for what they wanted and then transfer it, you know, you were just sort of told to vote for the party that you chose from in the first past the post. So that makes it less democratic in that sense. Whether that had a small effect on it, but no, I agree with you. I don't know what the solution is. I mean, the only other thing I wanted to say was it is going to be interesting, and Andy Burnham has flagged this up a bit, the relationship between a Labour government and this now substantial number of elected mayors in our major conurbations and some more rural areas of the country. You know, all the sort of tensions that we expect once Labour's got into office, not able to give people the money that they want. Are the mayors going to combine together and there'd be some agitation between the Labour mayors in the country and the Labour government? I'd be interested to see what Kevin thinks about that.
Yeah, it will be an interesting dynamic, won't it, Kevin? Because it's easier for Andy Burnham to stand on the steps of a town hall and criticise the government when it's a different colour to his, but going to be a bit more challenging when Keir Starmer's Prime Minister, I guess.
Yeah, and I think it comes from Richard, you know, here in the West Midlands, that he was going to looking forward to working with the Labour government once Keir gets in. And that's all very well. And you can imagine for the next, you know, few months up until a potential November election, and then in the early period, 6 months maybe into that government, you could see that all working harmoniously and them all being lovely, lovely friends. But at some point, there will be differences, won't there? There will be challenges over powers or over money or about particular policy areas, where regional and national overlap. And I want mayors to be mayors of place, not to be mayors of party. And that is going to be a test for them, I think. And as you say, Jim, I think particularly with the larger number now, all but one of these metro mayors being Labour, the number of them, that's going to give them some greater heft if they organise themselves together. They've had in the past this sort of M8 group and so on, which is where there has been good cooperation, including between, you know, Burnham and Street, even with their political differences. So they could be stronger. There is talk of, and I know that mayors or mayoral candidates have attended shadow cabinet. There's talk of them attending more cabinets as time goes on. So in a way, that's a good thing. But I think that has to be counted, because in the end, for this mayoral model to work, just touching a little bit on what you were saying, Jim, this mayoral model to work, they do need to be semi-independent. And they do need to be able to have, you know, robust debate with their colleagues in government. But as we know, of course, probably the bigger challenge is for mayors and their officers and their combined authorities is the battles that they have with Whitehall mandarins and with people in the Treasury, more so probably than the people holding the great offices of state.
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting challenge for all of those mayors, Ben Houchen aside, to see how they do manage and handle that relationship with government, because they're not going to get everything they ask for. But I suppose the early thing that Keir Starmer and a new Labour government could do is start to devolve some additional powers to those people so that they can begin to raise their own cash to do the stuff that they want to get on and do. And, you know, existing resources that are going into those regions, well, give them the power to utilise that in the way that they think as well. The other disappointing thing from the mayoral model, in a sense, was the whole Andy Street, Richard Parker battle in the end, because it became about the national political parties, didn't it, very quickly. You know, and again, I was seeing people posting on social media who had supported Andy Street, obviously, naturally Labour supporters, say, I'm sorry I voted for Andy Street now because the Tories are going to use this as a stick with which to beat Labour with. You know, you're not making enough progress. And that is, again, it's part of the culture of UK politics that we'd like to get away from, I guess, isn't it? You know, we would like to see these mayoralities identified with the personalities that are running them and be more independent of party. But it's not happened yet, has it, Kevin?
It's not happened yet for all of Houchen and Street's efforts, particularly in this last election, to distance themselves as much as they possibly can without resigning their memberships. That I don't know how you get around that, because as we know, it takes money, quite a lot of money, and it takes a lot of legwork to get elected to anything, and therefore you need organisation. And what are the organisations you need? Well, they're called political parties. So it's very difficult, and particularly I think urge you back on first past the post, and you don't, the plurality that comes from having a supplementary vote or some kind of PR system has been taken away. So I'm not sure what the answer is. I think there's a wider point also about the quality of candidates coming through, and I'm thinking obviously particularly about Susan Hall. You do need the parties to take these posts seriously. They can't be sort of party posts. They can't just be for any old Tom Dick or Harry who comes along, has maybe been an activist or a deputy council leader or deputy leader of regional assembly, Frank, or anything like that. You do need some quality people coming through, and that's of course what happened with Andy Street. He was tapped up by Mike Whitby to go for this role. He'd been doing the LEP chairmanship in Greater Birmingham and Solihull, but you do need those other sort of richer, I don't mean in cash terms, richer personality, people with ideas, with leadership potential, or have shown leadership in other fields coming through. But I'm not sure how you get away from it being a sort of party stack system. But I think, just going back to the point we were talking about just before, I think if I were the mayors working together separately from the Labour Party, certainly the Labour mayors, and maybe Houchen with them, the first thing I'd be doing is putting pressure on Keir to make sure he does bring in that Take Back Control Act that is promised, a sort of constitutional reform on the back of maybe without the Lord stuff, but that's another matter. But with some of those things, and with some of the promises being made about making the mayors even more powerful and more independent, etc., I think the first thing they should be doing, apart from congratulating Keir into number 10 if that happens, is making sure that they stand by the proposals that Lisa Nandy, Angela Rayner, Gordon Brown, etc. have made around constitutional reform and about devolution.
Yeah, I was leader of the regional assembly, Kevin, not deputy. Just
I think it's just that people thought you were the deputy. I don't know. I can't remember.
Just before we finish on the polls, Liberal Democrat performance, they did secure more council seats than the Conservatives, so they will have been buoyed by that. But in places like the West Midlands, in Liverpool, fallen into fourth place. Now, certainly I can speak from the Merseyside perspective. Not that long ago, the Liberal Democrats ran Liverpool City Council. It's been a huge fall from grace for them, and I think that's a combination of the involvement in the coalition government 2010 to 15, when obviously austerity hit places like Liverpool and Birmingham hard. But I think the other point is, Jim, certainly I can speak from the Merseyside perspective here. Be interesting to get Kevin's view on local Liberal Democrat performance in the West Midlands. But the leadership locally hasn't been great either. You've gone from Mike Story, very high profile, energised, good connections and network in Westminster, to Liberal Democrat leaders who simply not known. So I don't want to focus on Liverpool or the West Midlands for that matter. The general performance of the Liberal Democrats first, but that would be interesting to get your comments on what's gone wrong for them in places where they were previously strong.
They have actually got more councillors now than the Conservatives nationally, and they were delighted to win Dorset, which, as you told us last week with your thorough research, you pointed us in that direction, so I paid particular attention to that. They took Dorset. It was interesting in Stockport, they made 2 gains. They were 1 short because of Labour resistance, and that's with a strong Labour Party, they do struggle. I think one of the main things that really struck me from these elections was that, of course, people have got quite a buffet of alternatives if they want to protest against the two main parties now.
Yeah.
They can vote Reform, they can vote for the Greens, and particularly I think the Greens present a real challenge to the Liberal Democrats on the sort of on the left of British politics. So I think that's one of the reasons. But the more general thing is what we've already discussed, that Sir Ed Davey, very nice man. We all know about his caring responsibilities for his disabled child and all that sort of thing. But he's not charismatic. He's he in the absence of having charisma, I quite like it actually. Every time they appear, they've got a new gimmick. Yesterday it was inflatable dinosaurs to show the Tories were. So they're doing their best, and but they are, and I've had this from a fairly high source. They are in the general election going to aggressively target the southwest and around London. And they're going to virtually ignore the north of England to try and break down the blue wall. And they were crowing about how is it Michael Gove and people like that are in peril in Wallingford and places around London. So that's what they're hoping to do. But in terms of local government, with the exception of Stockport, yes, they've virtually disappeared. I mean, you mentioned Liverpool. I mean, Sefton's another one. In the days of Ronnie Firm when he was the MP, but Labour have completely come to dominate Sefton.
And what
I
about
mean,
what's the Liberal Democrat sort of profile there?
Well, I mean, they came last in the mayoral election, which is not great, really. They've got some very, Paul Tilsley is an old ex-leader of the Lib Dems, very well respected, and they've got some of the other good people. But the problem is, what are they for? I mean, that's partly to Jim's point about Greens and Reform offer you a home for your kind of protest vote, or if you feel very strongly in those regards. But in the old days of a Paddy Ashdown, Charles Kennedy, etc., and others, and even Mr. Facebook, they had at least one policy that they were, whether it was a pupil premium, whether it was anti-Iraq, whatever it was, they had at least one thing you could hang your hat on. So what can you hang your hat on now? Well, I mean, if you and I, the three of us, were asked what is the main sort of Lib Dem fighting point, what's the main policy, what's the thing they're going to be famous for? I can't tell you what it is. You've got to have at least one thing. That said, as Jim's touched on, I mean, clearly they're very good at by-elections. They're known to be very good at by-elections. And I think what Jim says is right. They're going to target whatever it is, 40 seats or something, in the blue wall, largely in the south and southwest. They're going to go after some, Tories who are looking, A, because they're looking tired in government, and B, because that's just where the pendulum is swinging. If they get themselves back and target, whatever that number of seats is, and get themselves 30, 40 seats in a new parliament, probably behind Keir Starmer, who I think will probably get a small majority, but then they become, a cluster of MPs that could exercise some degree of power and influence and possibly beat the SNP and get that third party slot, and therefore they'll get a PMQs every week, etc. That will make a bit of a difference. But really, I mean, Jim's right about Ed Davey, very nice man, although probably if you work in the post office, you might not think that. But you've got to have at least one thing that you're for and that you're known for, that you want to be famous for. And I don't know what that is, apart from knocking down polystyrene walls.
Well, Europe's the obvious one, Kevin.
And Europe was the one, yeah.
That's the obvious thing, that they could break cover from this political cowardice that we're seeing and say that the Brexit has been botched and we are the party of return, if not wholly return, at least to the single market and things like that. That's what I would suggest. Historically has been their selling point, and that's what they ought to have the guts to return to.
Well, they tried that last time. It was a disaster, wasn't it?
Well, yeah. So, but that was too soon, and it was too extreme. It was a straight rejection of the referendum result. I'm thinking of a slightly more modest thing, but I'm just, you pose the question, what could they actually put forward? And that seems to be the striking issue that they could strike out. There is some evidence that a lot of people, more in hope than expectation, have gone back to Labour because they're disillusioned with the Liberal Democrats' desertion of Europe.
I think that Europe would be an obvious signature policy for the Liberal Democrats in the fact that neither the main political parties wish to talk about it, really. I'm not sure whether it's cowardice or just pragmatism, Jim, though, because, again, when people poll these things, although there is sort of buyer's remorse as far as the Brexit decision is concerned, people don't want to go back into seeing our politics embroiled in that whole Europe-UK relationship debate again. And the thing that we seem to forget about that whole policy issue is that it would take the Europeans for, bloody hell. I mean, what would they think if we said to them, I'll tell you what, we made a hell of a mistake. Can we come back? Listen, there are things that we can do, and I'm sure will be done with our European partners that can make things better. I will doubt very much whether a new Conservative government would not take the option of starting to create better relationships with the EU moving forward. And if you look at Rishi Sunak's record, dare I say this, the Windsor Agreement was a far better deal than Boris Johnson secured as far as a Brexit deal is concerned. And I am told, in Koonsberg style, that behind the scenes, our Whitehall mandarins are being encouraged to open up conversations with their counterparts in Europe. So I don't think that you're ever going to see, in our lifetime, sadly, a return to the EU that we enjoyed at one point. But I think we will see warmer relations moving forward, the more practical relationship with the EU, whoever is in government. That is my prediction. There you go. Jim, we can't leave this week without talking about the weekend's football results, because I was crowing about Everton's magnificent 7 days in the sun a week or so ago, and Plymouth Argyle managed to secure safety to the Championship at the weekend, a fabulous 1-0 victory over Hull City. But of course, that sent down Birmingham City, and Kevin might have a view on that, but we'll go to the winner first. Jim, were you at the game? Were you at Hale Park?
No, I wasn't. It's a family weekend. We've got 2 family birthdays, so I wasn't able to go, but I was watching it, and it was real squeaky bum time. Particularly, we scored, and then Birmingham scored, and I just could see Hull City just sneaking an equaliser. Their fans came down full of hope, but then they became depressed because of West Brom's victory.
They were going for a playoff place,
They were going for a playoff place, but with West Brom winning, that faded away, and that may have taken the stuffing out of them. But it was very, very tense. But I just need to say, because Patrick Burns, who Kevin will know well, and listeners in the West Midlands will know well, was the BBC's West Midlands political editor and a great friend of mine. It was very, very difficult for us both this week, because I bear Birmingham City no ill will, apart from Stansfield, who's an Exeter City fan and revealed a T-shirt supporting them, and unlike him. But apart from that, I've got nothing against Birmingham. But the only thing I would say is that if we'd gone down, it could well have been 10 seasons before we got back. But with Birmingham, with their new management, I think it will be a one-season blip. And there was a Telegraph article on Saturday which was making that point. But so I'm very sorry for Birmingham going down, and we've just got to do better next season, particularly if we can keep a manager and he's not from Merseyside.
Well, Kevin would acknowledge that actually it was a Merseyside manager that's not done so well for Birmingham City, I think.
This is true. Well, in a way, I don't blame Wayne Rooney himself so much as the club, albeit under previous overall management, the club making a rather daft decision of a man who was doing well, Eustace, and then bringing in some, a star to take over a club, and it went the other way. If I can put politics and football together, because I think they do go together, because I think what is important in the West Midlands, as it will be elsewhere, and I know you've got similar going on with Everton, Frank, it is exciting in Birmingham because you've got both Aston Villa and Birmingham, in various forms of stadium development or new stadia, etc., and sort of wider developments go around those stadia. Coventry's run in the FA Cup and that famous semi-final against Man United, which almost trumped their 87 victory, etc. Now, we know from Manchester and from Liverpool the importance of the success of their clubs, the two clubs in Manchester, just the one club in Liverpool that's done them a favour, really, in terms of reputation, Frank. I should reveal I am a Liverpool fan. It has, along with music, it has a big impact on the brand of a city or a city region. And you'll notice in a lot of Andy Street's social media posts, particularly running up to the election, he was claiming, part of Aston Villa's success or Birmingham's, business success of late, or Coventry City, etc. Politicians do like to insert themselves into these things, sometimes justified, sometimes not. But certainly having a successful football club on the field, and a successful football club in terms of its, community and its wider community and economic imprint on a region is incredibly important. And I think we should not dismiss that as a bit of fluffery. It makes a big difference to a city brand.
Absolutely, and it's a nice segue, Kevin, to me telling our listeners about an event that we're hosting in Birmingham about the sports quarter development that's happening. And of course, great legacy from the Commonwealth Games. Birmingham City, although they've been relegated, as Jim said, they would be favourites to come back up into the Championship. Big investors involved now, new stadium potentially being developed. And Villa, I think after yesterday's results, almost definitely going to be playing Champions League football next season. So really good for the West Midlands region. And of course, Manchester will probably go on now to secure their fourth title in 4 years. Bit boring, I think, for the Premier League. I'm sure City fans wouldn't agree with me, but it is all becoming a little bit too predictable, is that top division in English football for me. Liverpool will be back in the Champions League, and hopefully Everton will have secured a new owner, and the stadium, of course, will be finished, and we'll kick off the 25-26 season at Bramley Moor Dock. So, as you say, Kevin, hugely important for the economy and the profile of cities and city regions, and Manchester, West Midlands and Liverpool all testify for that. But none can compare with the fantastic performance of Plymouth Argyle over the weekend. So congratulations once again, James, to you and your team. Listen, we've talked about lots of things today. We could have talked about much more. We haven't even spoken about Rwanda and a possible deal with Iraq, I read this morning. Wouldn't that be fun? Let's ship people over to there. And as well as Rwanda, I wonder whether Kemi Badenoch is able to go onto the airwaves to say how many of her colleagues have enjoyed a week or two in Iraq. We wait and see. But that's all from the Downtown Den Politics podcast this week. We look forward to seeing you all again next week, where no doubt we'll get some feedback from what Saining was like from Joe Phillips. Good to see you all. Thanks, Kevin. Thanks, Jim. Catch you all again soon.
Thanks, chaps.